everybody's choice for president around here, increasingly, Marc Lamont Hill, had something to say in response to the protesters who protested Joe Biden's exploitation of the grief of the church that suffered such a horrific tragedy at the hands of Dylan Roof. Last Sunday, St. Sabina Church welcomed me to deliver their annual Martin Luther King Day message. As always, it was a blessing to be in such a beautiful space of radical love and beloved community. I did my best to link my words to the legacy of MLK by challenging empire, calling for justice, and demanding action from all of us. Gratitude to my friend and brother, Father Michael Pfleger, for the generous invitation, and more importantly, his commitment to the liberation of black people. See, right there, man, this guy was never going to keep a job on CNN.
I know him.
So to see his full remarks, he has a YouTube channel. But here's an excerpt of what he had to say at the church. Now, this is a guy who has completely given up on ever being on a CNN panel again, because they don't forget shit like this.
Rights. So the AME Church is a church of struggle. And it's also a church of tragedy. We know that Dylan Roof went into that church and killed 9 beloved saints as they were praying. So I was a bit struck last week when I saw that they opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe. Y'all can get mad, I don't care. And people, as he began to give his campaign speech, some protesters stood up and said, "Stop the blood in Palestine." They said, if you're outraged by the blood of Selma and you're outraged by the blood that was spilled in this very church, then how about calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, since you giving them the weapons, you giving them the support, you giving them the money? Joe, why don't you do something about it? They marched and stood up and got kicked out of the church, and people said, we're outraged. You know, I was outraged too. Yes, sir. How dare you use this sacred space? How dare you use this beloved pulpit? How dare you use this sacred tradition? How dare you use the words of Jesus, who overturned the tables in the temple, who was committed to overturning a Roman government, who was committed to speaking out against injustice? How dare you use this space as a shield for imperial war? How dare you use this space as a shield for violence? How dare you use this space as a shield for genocide? Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead. The moral atrocity that took place wasn't some disruptive protesters. It was the fact that you allowed the leader of the most violent and bloody empire in modern history to stand in this place and represent a tradition that he ain't got nothing to do with. How dare you?
I like his speech, but is anybody going to tell him it actually was invented for that very purpose? That's what the space was. Like, it turns out all your beloved institutions are for that, for a genocidal maniac to promote genocide.
I mean, it depends on how far back you go. What he's what he's referencing, what he's talking about, is that the black church was founded because, even though they were fellow Christians, the white church would not allow them to worship alongside them.
The Baptist conference.
The best they would do was sometimes they could sit in the back. And most churches wouldn't even do that. They'd put a tent outside for the black parishioners. So he's talking about how this was established. Get away from that.
Right.
This is for us. And it became such a strong bulwark in the black community because it became the place you could go when nobody else in society. There were no governmental institutions that were going to help the community. It was the only, and it still in many ways functions that way.
But most of those people were white in that. But we covered that when I think I was with you and we showed that protest.
Oh yeah.
It was almost all white.
Oh yeah. Well, but that's what he's saying. You profaned this tradition. You brought in a bunch of people who clearly were not from that church, I would imagine. They were not members of that church. He brought in Democratic donors and operatives. How else would you have gotten a crowd like that?
I thought it was
in
just
that church.
People
no,
from there.
no. Why would Dylan Roof pick that church if that's the crowd at that church?
Well, I thought less black people went there after the incident.
When you have that kind of a political event, they bring in their people. They bring in their local operatives. They bring in. I very much doubt that was the normal crowd for that church. So what he's addressing is, hey, you're coming in and you're hijacking a refuge, a place that we built for ourselves to support a genocide, which if you looked at the way the people in that room reacted, you know, this is part of the problem that people like Biden are having. That all of the contradictions in the Democratic Party's virtue signaling around identity is falling apart around this, because there are very few people who are from communities that have been victims of colonization and genocide who are going to get behind Israel or support Biden's policy on this. That's why they had to stack that room with the people who were in that room. There's no way that room was mostly made up of members of that church. The way the people in this church, the actual membership of a black church, reacted when he started talking about Palestine, that's what Biden would have gotten if they hadn't, as we say in the theater, papered the house with people who were,
bringer show is what
gonna. Keaton, you got anything?
Yeah, well, Wyatt Reed tweeted out a clip just a little while ago, just right before we went live. Apparently, right after that clip cuts out, he goes on to say, well, the moral atrocity that took place wasn't some disruptive protesters. It was the fact that you, meaning the black church, allowed the leader of the most violent and bloody empire in modern history to stand in this place. So spitting absolute fire there. And, you know, this is something that, you know, as a trio of white guys, we're not necessarily supposed to talk about that much. But I will paraphrase from our friend Nick Cruz, who tweeted out this morning something to the effect of, yeah, he's calling out the black church for selling out black people, often very poor black people, to the Democratic Party. That's something that, you know, a lot of black radicals like Nick and CJ have been saying for a very long time. And it's sort of a taboo to talk about that. But it's obviously a very real problem. James Clyburn handed Joe Biden the nomination. Without James Clyburn's endorsement, you'd be looking at nominee Bernie Sanders in 2020. And so that's something that I think a lot of black left-wing activists feel, that the church has really sold them out. And so I just wanted to bring that up.
What do you mean you're not supposed to talk about it? I talked about it with Marc Lamont Hill on my old podcast.
I'm just saying it's a taboo thing for like white people to pass judgment on the black church. That's why I just said, you know, that's coming from a lot of black radical spaces.
Absolutely. And watching Marc Lamont Hill speak that way, you know, calls to mind. We did have that conversation on MLK Day when Nick and CJ came on. They, on their own show, talked about where are the leaders today. And you look at that, man, that is worthy of the best of that leadership that I know of. I mean, that's really where it's supposed to be coming from. And
you don't want to get killed. That's why.
Well, you're right. And I think for so long, the only voices we've heard have been heroes of the civil rights leader that got their minds right later on, like John Lewis.
Right.
Or people who never really stood for anything in the first place, like Barack Obama. And it's been a very long time since you've really had a black leadership with a platform speaking that language. That's the old language. That's the language of anti-empire. Not a superficial anti-colonialism.
Mark stands up for stuff that he thinks. I mean, he always has done that. I give him credit for that.
There's why I've said before, some people have misinterpreted, most people didn't, some people did, that they only wanted to litigate colonization in the past because you can't do anything about it. And now this erupted in real life, in real time, and they're shocked that these students that they've been telling for decades now, with a lot of post-colonial studies, how terrible, that was always meant as a distraction. They never meant it. They always wanted the social activism focused on past crimes, on statues, on things that do not really affect the way things actually work. Israel is causing all of this to melt. It is causing all of it to come apart, because you can't tell people in all of their history classes and all of their philosophy classes and all of their social theory classes that colonization has horribly impacted people, and then tell them to support a modern white settler colonial project.
Yeah, right.
So having Marc Lamont Hill come out and speak this way, we have not heard that. We have not seen anyone with a platform. It's not that they're not out there. We haven't seen anyone with a platform and with his profile and with his fame come out and speak in that way that harkens back to Malcolm X or Eldridge Cleaver or Assata Shakur, these great figures from the past.
Come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to Europe. Do you live in Europe? We're going to be there. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.